November 20th Planning Board meeting, please rise for the pledge. First item on the agenda tonight is a resolution for Homeland. Discuss site plan and special permit application of a proposed new wireless telecommunication facility located on approximately 7.72 acres at 11 Abrams Road in Central Valley. Said property is known in the Village of Woodbury tax maps as Section 226, Block 1, Lot 38. Oh yeah, I guess I should do the minutes, huh? Hold on one second. Everybody, what? Yeah, a lot. Everybody have a chance to read previous meeting minutes? Can I get a motion to accept the minutes?
I'll make that.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Sorry.
For the record, Robert Codioso, law firm of Snyder, on behalf of the applicant. We did receive the draft resolution. We had no comments other than the fact that our understanding the county's planning referral did not come in the past 48 hours.
I didn't have words.
Is that on?
That was way too complicated for me. My apologies. Robert Godioso with the law firm of Snyder and Snyder on behalf of the applicant. What I mentioned before is we did receive the draft resolution. We had no comments other than it's our understanding the county referral did not come in within the last 48 hours. If I'm mistaken about that, I would stand corrected, but that was the information we received from the planning office.
That's true. I didn't get anything right. So we can go through the resolution. What we just can't.
You have jurisdiction to act tonight if you so desire.
Okay. All right. Start on page 7 with specific conditions. Everybody ready? Pursuant to the Village of Woodbury Code 31038P1-4, the applicant or its successors and assignees must apply for recertification of their special permit every 5 years, or the permit shall cease to exist. Such recertification must be made between 12 to 6 months prior to the 5-year anniversary of the effective date of this special use permit, i.e. the date that is fully executed, resolution is filed with the village clerk. Everybody okay?
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
Just as a matter following up on our prior discussion on this, on page 6 at the top, that part of the resolution will be revised since you have not received a letter from the Orange County Department of Planning, therefore allowing you to proceed with this matter.
Okay. Thank you. Prior to the issuance of a building permit, the applicant must submit a performance and removal bond in the amount specified by the village telecommunications consultant. Any questions, sir? Homeland Towers LLC and Verizon Wireless shall be jointly and severely responsible to the greatest extent allowable by law for compliance with the terms of the special permit and for the safe and proper maintenance of the site at all times. Board's okay with that? Prior to the signing of the plans, the applicant shall comply with the June 26, 2019 memorandum of the village engineer to the satisfaction of the village engineer. Everybody okay? Prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, the applicant shall update the Village of Woodbury Building Department's records with the name, address, and telephone number of the current emergency contact person for Homeland Towers LLC and Verizon Wireless, who must be available on a 24-hour basis for purposes of notifications regarding code and resolutions compliance, and for emergency and maintenance purposes. Homeland Towers LLC shall be the primary and responsible party for compliance. Everybody okay? The use and performance of the applicant's antennas and equipment approved herein shall be accomplished in such a manner so as best not to interfere with any emergency service communications within the village of Woodbury. The applicant binding itself and its successors and assigns and agrees that in the event that its operations or equipment approved by this resolution interferes with any emergency communication systems, that it will fully cooperate with the village to identify said interference. The failure to correct any interference issue shall require the applicant or its successors to assign, to be directed to appear before the planning board for further discussion and possible modification and or revocation of the special permit consistent with applicable federal law. Everybody okay? Questions? Good. 7, the applicant must maintain at its own expense all permits and licenses required by applicable rules, regulations, laws, and said permits and licenses must be maintained in full force and effect for as long as required by the village or other government entity or agency having jurisdiction over the applicant as required under village code. Everybody okay?
Yep.
Yep.
We received this afternoon, I was out of the office, but we received this afternoon from your wireless consultant some suggested modifications to the resolution. I don't have but one copy of that, and so I can hand that up to you now, which will show those proposed modifications to the resolution, and you can read those and inquire of the wireless consultant whether or not you want to adopt those or not adopt them.
This is in addition to the 21, 22
Nothing's changed before 7. right?
That's right, yeah, that's why.
additions.
Thank you.
I have it on my screen also, so when you read them, I'll make sure.
Do you have this?
I do not, but I'll listen closely
Okay. Clear my voice up.
as best as I can.
As required by village code, the applicant shall notify the village of any intended modification of the wireless telecommunication facility, including, and this is, I presume that the red lines are changed, right? But not limited to,
The red lines that are in the text are additions, the deletions are over on the right when you get to those.
okay, I see. So, but not limited to the replacement of or any change to the applicant's antennas and/or ground equipment other than routine maintenance, and this is an addition. Upgrading of services to 5G, co-location, etc., pursuant to Section 6409 of the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012. Eligible facility request for the type of work described herein and exempt from discretionary zoning review by the village. This is an addition. All necessary village approvals and permits must be obtained before any modifications are conducted. Any questions?
No, that was, what number did you have that under? I'm sorry.
Number 8, sir.
Number 8. Understood. Thank you.
9 is unmodified. Any bonds or insurance required under the village code must be the satisfaction of the village engineer, village telecommunications consultant, and planning board attorney, and such bonds and/or insurance, if any, must be maintained in full force and effect for the duration of the special permits. Everybody okay? That's unchanged. Number 10 is unchanged also. The village reserves the authority to inspect the wireless telecommunications facilities in order to verify that the holder of the special permit and any and all lessees, renters, or licenses placed and constructed such facilities, including towers and antennas, in accordance with all applicable technical, safety, fire, building and zoning codes, laws, ordinance, and regulations, and other applicable requirements as permitted under village code. Any questions, concerns? Good. 11 is unchanged. After installation and prior to receiving a certificate of occupancy, the applicant shall furnish written certification to the satisfaction of the village building inspector that the wireless telecommunications facilities are grounded and bonded so to protect persons and properties and installed with appropriate surge protectors as required by village code. Now, number 12 has, I guess, it looks like a deletion and a change. Prior to the signing of the final plans, the applicant must furnish written certification that the telecommunications facility, structure, foundation, and attachments are designed and will be constructed as built to meet all federal, state, county, and local structural requirements for loads, including wind and ice loads, as required by village code. The building inspector reserves the right to comply a technical analysis of a structural and foundation design prior to issuance of the building permit. In addition, prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, the applicant must submit to the satisfaction of the village telecommunications consultant planning board engineer, and village building inspector, final construction drawings for the proposed antennas, and as-built plans of the Monopine facility is the addition. This approval assumes that excess soil from construction grading operations will be maintained on-site. Should any soil need to be transported off-site, it is the applicant's responsibility to comply with all local, state, and federal regulations pertaining to soil characterizations, transportations, disposal, and reuse. Groundwater encountered during foundation work should be handled in accordance with all applicable rules and regulations. Everybody okay? The applicant must maintain the minimum required balance in escrow to cover all village fees and expenses incurred until after the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. There were no changes there. All occupants of the board telecommunications consultants, as outlined in his reports to the planning board, including the November 3rd, 2019 technical memorandum, and any other reasonable requirements of said consultant, are to be completed to the satisfaction of said consultant prior to the issuance of a building permit, with correspondence of such satisfaction filed within the village, with the village building inspector. No changes there. Everybody okay there? Okay. Looks like we got a 15's changed.
Mr. Chairman, would you like someone else to read it? I can read it for you. Your voice is giving out.
Yeah.
17
It's up
more
to you.
go.
And 17 more to go. I'm good, thank you. Just fighting a cough. I'll get through this page and I'll hand it off to you. The monopine shall be constructed as a stealth tree monopole with thunder gray matted finish for the pole and with two-tone green branches which, to the extent practicable, shall be fire retardant, and a maintenance plan shall be in place for the maintenance of the structure satisfactory to the village wireless telecommunications consultant. The taper and density of the artificial branches will be in accordance with photo stimulations and drawings submitted to the applicant and reviewed by the planning board, and as specified by the village building department during the building permit phase of the project. That was an addition. Antennas, RRH units, main distribution boxes, brackets, and mounts to the antenna frames and visible sections of cables should be color matched to the branching scheme of the stealth tree. Industrial coating shall be used for painting of the monopole, antennas, and all the exterior equipment that is visible to the public. All cables of the applicant and co-locators will be routed within the monopole structure to the extent practicable. Details of the monopine color, along with the information of the vendors of the monopole / stealth tree components, the makes and models of the monopine and artificial tree limbs, and their required upkeep / maintenance of all facility components, including but not limited to density of the tree limbs, taper of stealth tree silhouette, fencing and landscaping, shall be provided to the building department as part of the site-specific maintenance plan and maintenance checklist, and approved to the building inspector prior to issuance of building permits. Antennas must be fitted with RF transparent sleeves of socks per building permit conditions. That was an addition. Fencing around the equipment compound shall be anti-climb, chain link with privacy slats of neutral color, and shall have a maximum height of 8 feet.
It's a big one.
Yeah, that was a doozy. Anybody have any questions or concerns?
No, just one point going back on the bonds that have to be maintained during the special permit. I assume that doesn't include the performance bond, the construction bond.
The town is out as a removal bond.
That's a removal bond, correct. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that.
But anything else would be in the code, yeah, would be current.
Nope. Go ahead.
We don't have a performance bond per se for monopole construction. We do have a restoration bond, so there may be a restoration bond requirement, and what that is if you walk away or something like that, we can restore the site to a reasonable condition and safe. So that's standard for a private site plan application.
Number 16. The facility shall be monitored remotely, and the town police department shall be notified whenever the remote alarm is triggered. Number 17. Prior to, and then adding issuance of a building permit, and deleting signing of the plans. The planning board's telecommunications consultant and building inspector must confirm that the applicant's structural and foundational analysis is acceptable. The structural and foundation analysis must confirm that the monopine design is sufficient to accommodate up to 3 additional co-locators below the antennas proposed in this application, and then deleting the rest and inserting the following, and address the recommendations of the November 3rd, 2019 technical memorandum of the village telecommunications consultant to the satisfaction of said consultant and the building inspector. Anybody have any problems with it? Okay. 18, as building drawings shall be submitted by the applicant to the village building department prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, and shall include the following information in addition to any other items required by the building department: documentation/survey of the actual monopine height, actual centerline height of the antenna array, and then in addition, and the location of the hinge point installed as an added measure to control potential fall zone, and then continuing, map of all trenches, utility runs, and utility connections associated with the new facility, documentation that antennas, transformer, generator, and all other equipment is properly grounded and in compliance with all applicable electrical and fire codes, and documentation that all required permits for work have been obtained and complied with, period, adding no lighting shall be installed on the monopine structure. Anybody have any problems, questions, comments? 19 is a new condition and reads 2 24-inch maple trees within the equipment compound lease area will be removed. No additional removal of trees for the facility or the installation of the utility conduits shall occur. Per the United States Fish and Wildlife Service letter dated March 14, 2019, tree removal will occur between October 31st and March 31st. Bright orange construction fencing and/or flagging will be used to demarcate trees, if any, to be protected. Number 20, the applicant shall install, routinely inspect, and maintain all, insert facility contact, continuing FCC type and notification signage in accordance with all FCC rules, regulations, and guidance. Security fencing shall also be routinely inspected and maintained. All right, 21, prior to the issuance of a building permit, the specifications for the emergency generator shall be reviewed by the village building inspector and fire department for sufficiency. And then adding, the generator's exhaust shall be positioned face toward the New York State Thruway and Estrada Road to mitigate potential noise to nearby receptors, and periodic testing of the generator shall occur at a maximum frequency of 1 day per week or every other week for a maximum of 15 to 30 minutes during the weekday business hours. And then continuing, a sound attenuator and intrinsic secondary fuel containment shall be included as part of the generator. It is the applicant's responsibility to comply with all appropriate New York State DEC regulations with regard to the operation of the generator. Number 22, by this approval, the planning board chairperson is authorized to sign the Village of Code Chapter 165 freshwater wetland permit to be prepared by the planning board attorney in accordance with Chapter 165. Said permit shall include the required code section 165-9 conditions of said permit, together with any additional conditions authorized by the planning board as a result of the public hearing, comments, or otherwise. The freshwater wetland permit shall be signed by the chairperson prior to the signing of the plans for the project and shall be attached to the filed copy of the resolution. 23, as provided in the Village of Woodbury Code Section 165-12, the planning board requires that prior to commencement of work under the freshwater wetland permit, the permittee shall post a cash or surety bond with the Village of Woodbury in an amount as recommended by the Village of Woodbury engineer, conditioned upon the faithful compliance with the terms of the freshwater wetland permit, and for the indemnification of the Village of Woodbury for restoration costs resulting from any such failure to so comply. This bond shall be in favor of the Village of Woodbury and be in such forms as is acceptable to the planning board attorney, parens the attorney for the Village of Woodbury designated for this purpose, close parens. The bond shall remain in effect until the planning board certifies, based upon input from the Village of Woodbury engineer, that the work has been completed and the wetland and its functionality has been established, or is otherwise provided in Village of Woodbury Code, Section 165-12. There is also some proposed modification to general conditions, and reading through them, I don't think they're really necessary. I think that your general conditions would suffice in this regard. Okay, that's it.
Thank you for taking over there.
That's all right.
Dennis or Mike, do you have anything else to add before?
No, I don't. No.
All right.
Maybe I missed it here, but on some of the applications that we've had, did we have some language about they must maintain the access road at all times for either emergency vehicles or something? Because if it's a snowstorm and it's on fire, I mean,
I know that when we had, for example, the Mar Lane application, there was a concern there about the parking of cars for the dealership, and the fact that many times when you have dealerships like that, cars start getting parked when they get deliveries that they don't expect all over the place. So I think we had a requirement that they not obstruct the entrance. This one doesn't have any special circumstances, although they shouldn't block the access to the site. There's a gate there, and it shouldn't be blocked. I don't think there's any parking shown or permitted in that location. If you wanted to add something with a condition that there should be no blockage of the access road for ESOs, I think that would be fine.
I think that's all right. I think we did put that on the plans as well.
Okay.
So that they're gonna do the snow plowing and maintain the access.
They have to maintain the access, yes.
Is that on the plan? Do you know where it is on the plan?
Honestly, I didn't look carefully.
If it's on the plan, then we don't have to put in the resolution.
We don't object to a condition added that says that we'll maintain access to the facility, something general is that.
Is it just easier to add a 24, Rick?
Yes.
It was based on one of Dennis's comments that there would be no parking in front of where we were trying to access into where the facility is.
Would we have a requirement where in front of the access gate with certain dimensions, we would paint it, stripe it, saying no parking there?
I think the snow was more of an issue for the propane tank, right?
Yeah. The propane tank, when we looked at it, we actually were there when they came to fill it, and they currently now run a hose back there. So that was not the concern, but I understand the concern about maintaining access to the facility for emergency services. We get that.
So as long as maintaining means maintaining the snow, I think we're in a good.
No, I think that's the point. I think that maintains for any reason. So if a tree fell over.
Rick is crafting as we speak.
I think maintenance, when we do talk about this, maintenance is generally all encompassing. For example, it could be a tree, it could be a pothole, it could be a utility repair, it could be snow plowing or anything. Maintained access means maintained access. Now, that's in a reasonable time. In the middle of a snowstorm, you may not have access for a little while, but surely after its completion, it should be clear.
Can I? Condition 15 notes a maintenance plan that's been added to it, including not limited to the visual aspects, fencing and landscaping, but we could certainly include that in there, and I think it's inherently included within that. A prior cell tower application that was reviewed at First Avenue did have a lot of access road and a culvert feature. If you remember, that was kind of a long pathway in. There's a lot more tree removal, erosion, sediment control. So I don't think we have to say access here, but I think we could add something to the resolution that just nails it down.
I propose for a specific condition number 24, the following. Applicant must maintain free and open access to the facility, including but not limited to snow and ice removal, sufficient to the extent that emergency services shall have easy access to the facility.
Anybody else have any other questions? You good with that addition? Good. All right. Need a motion to accept the resolution of approval as amended. Second?
Aye.
You seconding it or you
I'll
aye?
second it.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That comes.
No.
4-1. Sandy was enough. On to the regular agenda items. Schlesinger, public hearing, proposed three-lot subdivision located off of Susquehanna Trail and Scudamock Road in Highland Mills. Said property is known of the Village of Woodbury tax map as Section 204, Block 1, Slot 2 and 3. There's a button on the bottom, a little black indent.
Hidden well. Okay, good evening, David Higgins from Lankentelli Engineering and Surveying. The application here tonight is a three-lot subdivision. It's a three-lot subdivision located on the north and south side of Scudamock Road. And it's just west of the intersection of Sequoia Trail. The property encompasses a total of 108 acres in the village of Woodbury, and the map also shows approximately 15 and a half acres of land that's in the town of South Blooming Grove on the north and west side, and the reason for that is because the deed for the property actually was done before the municipal boundary was formed between the two municipalities. So we actually, right now the deed includes the three properties in the village of South Blooming Grove, and we've designated the approximate boundary line between those. So the proposal is for Lot 1, which is 6.61 acres, 6.618 acres at the corner of Sequoia Trail and Scudamock Road. Lot 2, which is 98.9 acres, and that we have a proposed residence in the back here on that. And Lot 3, which is 16.162 acres. All three lots are individual single-family dwellings. Each of them would be served by a proposed sewage disposal system and an existing well. We have shown on the map the bulk requirements for each of the lots. There is a zoning boundary that divides the property. Everything on the north side of Scudamock Road is in the R3A district, which requires 3 acres. And on the south side of Scudamock Road, it's in the R2A district, which requires 2 acres. We show a bulk zoning table, which shows compliance for all 3 lots. So in the subdivision plan set, we've shown a grading and utility plan for each of the 3 lots. Due to the significant separation distance between Lot 1 and Lot 2 and 3. The one sheet shows Lot 1, shows a single-family residence, 5-bedroom, with the driveway coming off of Sequoia Trail, sewage disposal system in the back. Soils tests were completed for the septic system, and a well basically in front of the residence. There are some little pockets of wetlands that were located. We are no closer than 100 feet to any of the wetlands, so we're meeting the village's requirement for the wetland separation, the 100-foot buffer. Moving over to lots 2 and 3, we show Lot 2, again on the north side of Scunny Monk Road, a driveway going into the house, another 5-bedroom dwelling with a sewage disposal system in the front. Again, soils tests having been completed for that, and likewise, Lot 3 on the south side of Scunny Monk Road, again, a 5-bedroom dwelling with a sewage disposal system serving that. We have on the plan shown the limited disturbance really just for what's needed for the driveway, for a reasonable yard around the dwelling, and for the septic system. So on the map, we've shown a limit of the limited disturbance to try and reduce tree clearing and limit the visual impact of any of the houses from the roads. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Any questions for? You said it was going to be a shared well between the 3 homes?
No, each home has its own well.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great. Dennis?
The first thing is lot areas. David, you get a copy of our report?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Did you see the confusion that we had in terms of lot areas? And I think it may relate to the land in South Blooming Grove, but I'm not sure. And I just want to get that sorted out in terms of, I mean, these are large lots. So there's a difference in some areas. Some may be typos on the plan. The others may be just an understanding of what's included in the Lot 1 area.
I think it was a combination of both. In one area, it was a typo. I think on the in the notes section, we had a typo. And in the table, we just didn't, in one area under the existing, we included the Village of South Blooming Grove parcel areas, because again, what I spoke about before in the deed going into that land, we weren't really changing the acreage of that, so I didn't list it under the proposed, but if it's easier and more clear to do so that you can check the areas, we can do that.
Right. It was somewhat difficult for us. We saw the difference in the areas, tried to figure out what it was. Then we realized that it was missing about 15.5 acres, and that looks like exactly what is over in Blooming Grove. So my suggestion is that if you want to list the lot area for Lot 1, you list the lot area for 1 in the Village of Woodbury lot area in South Blooming Grove. You can still keep your notation that the lot line dividing the two, which is the village line, is somewhat subject to interpretation, and so that the areas may switch back and forth, but that's the basic lot area, and then there's a total lot area. So sorry for all the confusion there, board, but you have very large lots. I think I just want to make sure all the lot area is accounted for in all the totals on here when the map gets filed. Let's see. We talked about utilities, and they propose on-site utilities. There is a water line that is in the vicinity, which is part of the system that's owned by the Village of Curious Joel. And there's also a sewer line here, which is with the Village of Woodbury. They are not in the improvement area right now for the sewer, which is in control of the Village of Woodbury. I think the applicant made overtures, which we requested they do to the village boards to ask, and you didn't get a reply back. Is that correct?
Well, we went to a meeting with the village board, and although we didn't get to a point where they actually rendered a decision, there was really a lot of concerns that were relayed by board members as it related to the connection and what they viewed, as I understand it, was the potential of connecting the property to the water and sewer and, having 120 some odd acres of land now in the improvement area, that was a concern of theirs. So we didn't ask for a decision that night, and we just never returned, given those concerns.
Okay, and there are concerns, I know, by the sewer superintendent regarding that system and adding any more into it. So for right now, I don't think that's it. And you've taken care of on-site septic systems for these lots. Now, it's my understanding that with lot number 1, the intent is to develop that lot as shown. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the other 2 lots, these are basically placeholders to show that they're developable lots?
Yeah, originally, when we were putting the application together, you might remember, the applicant had no intention of actually building on those lots. Now that we've gone through the exercise of showing that they're buildable, they haven't told me they have any interest in building on it, but presumably with the subdivision map filed, they potentially could.
Okay, well, what this would create, if this lot were filed, would be the ability to develop 3 lots with single-family residential dwellings. The concern of the board, obviously, in your planning aspects is if that's not the case and it's to be built further, what you might need to consider. And lot number 1 is 6.6 acres. It has some encumbrances with wetlands in local area. They're planning on building that way. Don't know if it could be further subdivided with net lot area. Lot number 3 is 16 acres. It might have a further subdivision, but that also has some wetland issues. Lot number 2 obviously is it's 98.9 acres listed here, but that's in the village of Woodbury. I think there's another 15 acres, so this is a fairly good sized piece of property, and it could be subdivided further. In talking to your planner, Stu Turner, he suggested that a requirement that you have in your code for the extension of roadways be considered in this application. Not that necessarily it would, but that by your action, you're not impeding the ability to provide logical and planned growth for the area. When you developed, or when the planning board approved the Country Crossing development, it included a spur road. It's called Road D to Country Hollow Road here, and that comes up to the borderline here. I think perhaps as a consideration here, the planning board might want to take a look at an extension of that road and tying it back into Scunnamunk, which would provide for a subdivision. Not that you're encouraging further subdivision, but you're encouraging planned considerations of how road systems might be provided so as to provide for good circulation of traffic. And I will tell you that there are significant encumbrances on lot number 2 for further development. Shadow Lake is shown on there. Also, the whole area over towards the village of South Blooming Grove and that entire, I guess it's northwesterly section, has very steep slopes. I think we're about 35% in there. So that's not something that would be easily developed.
Those are mountains.
Those are mountains. So nevertheless, the roadway D, if it was to swing around and connect to Scunnamunk Road, could show for a lot development, maybe a few lots, all right? Not that you have to, I don't think they have to do a development plan for lots now, they just have to show the interconnectivity of the roads, and I think that's a reasonable recommendation from your planner. So they might want to do that.
Would it have to be? Are you suggesting that it be shown on the plan prior to the planning board acting on this?
Yes. I think that the applicant should give us some indication. The applicant should show some indication. It doesn't have to be a developed plan. It just has to be a reasonable path to provide connectivity of the road system. Certainly, we wouldn't want to have something going over 35% slopes or something like that, but that's a fairly flat section going through there.
Okay. Are you I guess 2 things. One, I don't believe I've seen the comments from, those are from Stu Turner. You had indicated?
Stu didn't write comments. He just gave me I think he sent it around to a few, yeah, he sent around an email to say that he had looked at this, and that was one of the things he mentioned in the code from a planning aspect and thought we might want to consider, and I thought it was good advice.
Okay. And second question, showing the potential connection, is that just for the planning board record, or is that something that's expected to be on the filed subdivision map?
On the map?
on the file map. Okay.
Now,
Provided that the planning board agrees to it.
now, would it also have to show that that land, or that right-of-way would be offered to?
That would be a roadway, it would be a right-of-way offered. It's to show, it's actually just to show the possibility. It's not actually a requirement in terms of a dedication that's going to be offered right now.
Okay.
It's a property. It's a configuration showing a logical progression of a roadway connection. If that lot comes in the future, they may have a completely different road, as long as it's acceptable to you. That just shows that you've done your due diligence and you've planned for road connectivity, and that's all it is.
Does that have to be a roadway that's up to village specs, or?
You wouldn't have to go into that kind of detail at this point in time. The applicant could build a road and keep it as a private road, and subsequently you may agree to that. Provided it's up to village specs, it could be private rather than offered for dedication. So this is just a notation on the plan that here's something that was thought about by this board when you approved the subdivision, that this was a good place to put a road, sort of in the abstract, because you don't have a specific plan for the further subdivision of that lot. When there's a further subdivision of that lot, it may not make any sense to have the roadway there. It may make sense to have it someplace else. But at least for this subdivision, it would, I agree with Dennis and Stu, that it would make sense to have it on the plans to show that there is some connectivity that this board considered, that a future board, if it looks at this, will also consider that because it's on the plans. But there's nothing else that's shown on here as the location of any development on any of these three lots, right? It's sort of a bare subdivision, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, really, the intent was for Mr. Schlesinger to basically just purchase the, 6 acre extra change acreage in that corner for construction of the house. As I said, there really wasn't any real intention to build on the other two. And again, they've gone through the exercise of showing that they're buildable, so again, I don't want to preempt the possibility of that happening, but there's no other further development for any of that proposed other than.
But is there intention to have a home on that one lot?
On lot 1, yes.
But I don't see that on, is it on the other plan? It's noted on the other plan as to?
Yeah, there's a plan for it with a driveway and septic system.
Okay, so the planning board has to consider that, because if you approve the subdivision, you're approving also the location of the house at that location with that access.
Okay, a couple other things. One is shade trees. You typically have you have a requirement for shade trees and along frontages. In this particular case, they plan on having strict limits of disturbance. It's been the board's policy not to require planting a shade tree in front of a forest. So if they're going to maintain the trees and they agree to maintain those trees and only have the limits of disturbance that are shown, the board has the authority to waive the shade tree requirement, but it's something you have to act on. And I think that it would be appropriate, if the applicant's saying they're going to maintain those levels of disturbance, to waive them where woods and dense trees exist, not requiring a tree in front of that. However, if there's other areas that are cleared for the development, then they would have to plant the trees in accordance with your specifications, which I believe are 40 feet on centers.
So then if they couldn't maintain that level of disturbance, then if we waived it, would we have?
Your waiver provision would say, I would expect something like, if the limits of disturbance as shown on the plan are honored and the trees are remaining there, there would be no need to plant shade trees. However, if there are barren areas and areas where they have cleared, that shade tree shall be planted in accordance with the code.
What about the requirement?
You have done, the planning board has done this in the past with respect to ridge preservation, where there's building that is done in a fairly undeveloped area. And as Dennis noted, it's silly to go ahead and require somebody to clear an area, then put trees in. But what is required is that, to the extent that you believe that there is a strip necessary in order to provide that waiver, then that strip will be required in the resolution to be part of some type of easement that says that they can't remove those trees except if it's otherwise approved by the planning board. And you would only otherwise approve it if they came up with some plan. Let's say they decided they wanted to clear it later on, but we're going to plant trees, then that might be acceptable to you or future board. But if in fact you're going to waive it, it would be linked to an easement that would be required that they do not remove any of the trees in whatever area that you determine is necessary.
Now, there's no requirement for a tree survey in the area that's going to be cleared, so we know exactly like how many trees are coming down, the caliber of the trees that are coming down.
Well, there is a requirement in your code. Generally, in a heavily wooded area, you haven't required that if the buffer distances are sufficiently thick. But if you think that there's specimen trees in that area that you might want to reposition the house for, then you could require that. I know that they're somewhat restricted by, I mean, they've done a septic system or designed a septic system that's been excavated in an area that was suitable, they believe suitable and grade for both the situation of the well, which has to be up gradient or wants to be up gradient, so you don't have to have, if the well is down gradient, you have to double the distances, the separation, so they wanted to do that. There's also the house. You want it to flow by gravity if you can from the house over to the septic field. So that was kind of defined in a location. So there are certain limitations that they're under in terms of how they develop it. But you have the right to ask for a tree survey if you think it'll help in your decision-making process on the site plan.
And that it might be a good purpose for a site visit, to have the applicant go ahead and stake out where the limits of the clearing are planned to be, and you go on a site visit. You can look in there and decide for yourselves whether or not there's anything that is really of significance that you may want to go ahead and identify and address.
Yeah, the site survey for trees would be somewhat significant so for the expense for the applicant. So I'd suggest, as Rick said, in a site visit, you could determine whether there's any value to that. And if there is value to it, then you're going to require it.
Yeah, one of the things I would say is that, as we mentioned, given the acreage of the property, approximately, I think it was 135 total acres, we only have 1.6 acres for the project that's proposed to be disturbed. So we really have limited the tree clearing as much really as we can. Again, we do have to have, clearing around the house for the septic system. The driveways have been located based on site distance requirements. So we have limited as much as we can the tree clearing.
Right, but the whole purpose of, I think, what the chairman was getting at was that if they go on site and they see, let's say there's a specimen tree where your driveway is, and if you simply shift that driveway over 10 or 15 feet, you would avoid having to take down that specimen tree. That would be the purpose of looking at this, and rather than requiring an extensive tree survey, simply allow the planning board to determine whether or not there is anything worth saving, and if so, it will be marked, and the plan may or may not have to be adjusted as a result.
All right, then. I thought I was going to try it. I think it's working. As far as ridge preservation, is concerned, there are requirements, and this is above elevation 600. We took a look at this, and in our report, we gave you a little profile showing where the closest view corridor is and the grade between the two, and then we superimposed the line, if you will, for trees to about a 20-25 foot height. This area is a few thousand feet away from the closest ridge view corridor, and there is a substantial tree growth in between the two. In our opinion, there will be very limited view of these dwellings from those ridge corridor, but ridge preservation still exists. This just means, I believe, that you don't have to have a superimposed photo from those ridge corridor view corridors. Nevertheless, you need to make some determinations on ridge preservation, and the applicant's obligated to provide certain colors for the homes and that sort of thing to comply with it. We've already talked about wetlands. There's no wetland disturbance, but they will require a wetlands permit, local permit, because they are working on that property. And we'll have to take a look at that. And that's all I have, unless you have any questions on the report.
Dennis, on page 3 of your memo from November 12th, the third bullet under stormwater management, could you explain what construction runoff is, which was identified by the applicant that it could go into Shadow Lake and also...
Well, construction runoff is during the period of construction. During the period of construction, they're going to clear areas which will not be stabilized yet. When they work on the septic fields, they'll clear that area. And prior to placing the stone and placing all the materials, it'll be earthen. It'll be disturbed. And so construction stormwater runoff could run off from the site and could go to Shadow Lake if it's not otherwise protected. There is an obligation for erosion and sediment control, and they have an erosion sediment control plan, and they'll need to put appropriate measures in so as to take that stormwater runoff, which may have some silt, and pick up some materials along the way, either through silt fence, ponds, through stone, through a number of practices that can employ so that they don't create a problem at the lake.
Mm-hmm. And what is the enforcement of that? Is that, I know, I'm thinking about Legoland had problems with runoff and so forth with its construction.
Well, Legoland was obviously a somewhat larger site,
course,
okay?
yeah.
And they had a lot of activity and a lot of cleared area. They should not have that amount of cleared area. Yeah. And I think Dave's familiar with that too. I don't think they won't have anything like that. So, and they have a better opportunity the further they run from their site into whatever the receiving stream is. They'll need to install sediment control practices. It's a single-family home in this size. And what's your maximum? I don't recall. Do you remember the maximum clear area at one time?
Well, the total for the site is 1.6 acres. Lot 1, though, is, as we're saying, is probably the only one that's really going to wind up getting built the way we have it shown.
Is it less than an acre?
See what that is. It's less than an acre, though.
Yeah. A single-family residential less than an acre, it falls under the general construction activities permit, but it doesn't fall under our MS4, I don't think, because it's less than an acre there. So, but nevertheless, there'll be some inspection on that, and they're obligated to comply and to provide those practices. And they've shown them on the plan.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for Dennis or Rich? As it is a public hearing, I'll let you sit down and we'll go out to the general audience to see if there's any questions on this application. Anybody in the second row wish to speak on this application? Please come up to the podium and state your name, where you live, and your comments, please.
Neil Kraus, Highland Mills. I hadn't planned on speaking tonight, but when I saw the applicant's name, I recall them appearing before the village board when I was on the village board, and I have some of the same questions now as a private citizen that I had as a village board trustee. There was discussion of extension of the lighting district, the sewer district, and the water district, and particularly in relationship to what further development could be done on those acreage. And I still voice those concerns now, that I urge you to look at what the further future development could be and what the potential is for a request to come before the village board or another board on extending the water, sewer, and lighting districts. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the second row wish to speak on this application? Anybody in the third row? Anybody on the back wall? Anybody in the room? Once, twice? Motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, just a note with respect to Mr. Kraus's comments. On a three-lot subdivision, for which there's no plans on other than just the one lot that's being approved, there's nothing really for you to study at this time as to those potentials, but certainly that issues, or those issues rather, are preserved so that whenever a board has before it the potential further development of those, all those issues with respect to the potential growth-inducing aspects of water, sewer, lighting, the costs, the really ability to go ahead and do that in a proper fashion, all of those will be up for review at that time. It's not foreclosed simply because you are doing this three-lot subdivision.
But what would be to stop the applicant to keep coming in and doing a minor subdivision,
Yeah,
a
like
minor
piecemealing
subdivision,
it.
a minor subdivision?
It depends. There are, I think there are in this code. I can't remember for sure. Usually there are in codes that if you come back for multiple subdivisions, minor subdivisions with a certain period of one another, you can sort of recapture those and consider it a major subdivision. I have to look on your code whether you do that. But certainly, even without that provision, you have the ability to recognize a forest for what it is if that's what's happening. So that if in fact you see or are concerned that that's what's happening, you can address it at that time and make some conditions and resolutions that would prevent that from occurring.
Okay. Because I know there's a difference between the minor and the major subdivision and what is required and.
That's correct.
Okay.
And not saying this applicant is doing that, but certainly that tactic has been used in the past, both here as well as other municipalities.
How many lots is a major subdivision?
I had to look at the code.
I think it's 5, and they have to be less than 5 acres, as I recall. I'll double check that for you.
But these are fairly large lots. That comes under really subdivision law. You have to take a look at that, but I'll get back to you on that one for sure.
So how does the board feel about, does anybody else want to go out and see what the place site looks like? Have the applicant stake out the corners of the building and the driveway, just so we get an idea of what's going to be potentially cut down?
I like that idea.
Okay. How long do you think it would take for you to get somebody out there to put some stakes in the ground and some construction?
I'd say probably within a week. You were looking for the driveway in the house? Or you want the septic, everything, the whole limits of disturbance?
It would,
Whole limits of
Yeah.
All
disturbance?
limits, you.
yeah.
I think that showing where the driveway comes in is important, where the home is going to be important, and then the overall limits of disturbance. So that way the board can make a determination whether or not, for tree survey purposes and otherwise, whether this makes sense, where you're disturbing it, or whether the planning board thinks that it ought to be shifted over in one form or another in order to make the best plan possible.
Given next week is Thanksgiving week, I don't think anybody's going.
Not rushing out there next week, for sure.
Maybe I'll let the secretary know when we actually have it staked out, so that you don't, waste your time going out and finding that we haven't had it done yet. I'll let you guys know, let the secretary know when we have it completed.
Do we have to have an official date, Rick, or if the applicant's okay with us just going out there and? I know in the past, usually we've set a date together.
I think that's just because it's easier at a meeting when everybody has their calendars to go ahead and have that, but it's not required.
Okay.
This is not, such a site visit as this board knows, is not subject to the open meetings law, even if there's a quorum present, because it's not considered a meeting, provided you do not discuss the application there among yourselves, that it's just sort of a fact-finding role or visit. And then you'd come back to the board and deliberate and open as to what you consider and what you want to discuss. So it's not required to be set out in any particularity. Normally it's done, if it's not done in a meeting, it would be just done informally through the building department as to when it's ready for a site visit, when the members are ready, and the weather cooperates.
Okay.
I'd just like to add, if the board would like me to attend that site visit with them, I'd be happy to do that, at a particular time, if that's something you'd like.
Okay, I'm sure we can work the details out with an email or two and figure it all out.
One other aspect, as you know, with subdivisions, different than site plans, you must make a final decision on the application within 62 days of the close of the public hearing. You just close the public hearing. So the clock is running. If, in fact, you do not make a decision within 62 days, they're entitled to a default approval, for which you have no input whatsoever. So we always guard against that, obviously, at all costs. So because there still has to be a site visit set up, it's unclear as to when that is, especially because of the holidays. I'm asking the applicant to go ahead and waive that 62-day time period, and that if at some point in the future you want to withdraw that waiver, you can do so by notifying the planning board, and then at the next meeting would start your 62-day time frame.
That'll be fine.
Thank you.
We can do the EAF tonight, or should we wait?
It's up to you whether you want to do it. I think that there are some other issues that may help you with respect to this, especially after the site visit, so I would suggest that it be held off.
Okay, good. I'm hoping you would say that, because I want to see what it looks like. All right, and so also with your next submission, you'll have the potential connecting roadway on that for us too? All right. Do we need anything else or from the applicant, or everybody okay? Good. Rick, Dennis, we're good? Okay. All right, thank you. Did I just scoop up my agenda? I did. All right. Avalon, discuss zoning board referral request by applicant pertaining to a proposed lot line change and site plan to construct a 4-story, 130-room hotel at 94 Turner Road in Central Valley. Said property is known on the Village of Woodbury tax maps, Section 226, Block 1, Lot 5, and 6.2. Good evening. What are the variances for? I don't know if I got anything on it. Is it in there? I know one's for the building inspector's interpretation, right?
Go ahead.
We're seeking 2 forms of relief. So first, we're asking the zoning board to look at what the building inspector determined, which is that we don't have adequate frontage. And we are going to present to the zoning board why we believe, based upon this plan, we do have adequate frontage. If the zoning board agrees with us, then we're fine and we go on our merry way. If they don't agree with us and they uphold the building inspector's interpretation, then alternatively, we would ask them to
Okay. I got it. All right. So we need a motion, right, Rick, to refer them over? Okay, I'll make the motion to refer the applicant to the ZBA for what was stated for the potential area variance and for the interpretation of the building inspectors. Any questions? All in favor? Aye.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Motion to close.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.